Greetings and welcome to BE APH 161 2022 edition. My name is Rob Phillips, and this is a Caltech course that I, at least in part because of the pandemic, will be recording, pre-recording, and posting videos. This is a course whose title is Physical Biology of the Cell, and I want to kick it off basically by giving you a little bit of a philosophical flourish that explains the reason behind the course. And in fact, this whole, let's say, first hour and a half or so of vignettes, there'll be a series of such vignettes, are all designed to provide a philosophical backdrop. Now, one might say, why would we bother with the philosophy? And that's a fair enough question. I think it's true that there's great joy to be had, and there's great progress to be had in focusing on the technical details of how to write down models of biological systems and how to solve those models and how to use them in order to make predictions that are dangerous and so on. But prior to that, at least for my taste, I want to know why I'm doing things. What is the message? What's the prospect? What are we about here? And so I'm very inspired by this book by Evelyn Fox Keller about the life and work of Barbara McClintock, who was a great 20th century biologist who swam against the current at a time when molecular biology was coming to dominate. She was interested in organisms, and she had this expression about having a feeling for the organism, and I really resonate with that. And what we're going to do in this course is I view it literally as trying to develop a feeling for the organism and collections of organisms. What do I mean by that? What maybe did Barbara McClintock mean by that? So let's start with her. So I guess what I want to say is that what I think is especially inspiring about the work of McClintock is that she, like some of my other more modern heroes, an example being Hopi Hoekstra from Harvard, went all the way from molecular scale understanding to macroscopic phenotype and even function of biological organisms. In the case of McClintock, she studied, maize or corn, and she knew how to examine the chromosomes in a microscope, and on that basis to say something about the nature of the resulting organismal phenotype. So I just in reading about her and reading some of her papers and so on, I encountered various quotes which I'll give you here because I just like them. I like the way they capture my own imagination. One that we're going to come back to is her definition of understanding, and she says if something doesn't fit, there's a reason, and you find out what it is. And I'll be very interested in that concept of when do things fit and not fit. And what I'm going to argue is that mathematics is a way for us to proceed more quickly to the question of does our current understanding fit or not. I love this notion about routine. She claimed that she didn't want to delegate because she wanted to have a relationship with the organism herself. The claim being she could write the autobiography of every plant she worked with, and I like that because we heard about, not we, but what you can hear if you investigate it a little bit, that one of the reasons for moving away from Mendel's peas towards flies was that they develop more quickly. And I think it's cool because McClintock, basically, as you can see on the right, says no two plants are exactly alike. They're all different, and as a consequence, you have to know that difference. She explains, I start with the seedling, and I don't want to leave it. I don't feel I really know the story if I don't watch the plant all the way along. So I know every plant in the field. I know them intimately, and I find it a great pleasure to know them. And she says her answer is simple. Over and over again, she tells us one must have the time to look, the patience to quote unquote hear what the material has to say to you, the openness to let it come to you. Above all, one must have a feeling for the organism. And so I'll think of that as being the thread that runs through the course. It's what I hope that at the end you'll carry away is both an idea of just those four words, to feeling for the organism, but also how using numeracy and models and theory we'll be able to sculpt that feeling for the organism. I don't want to pursue that. So what about this course? What are the philosophical perspectives that we might bring to it? So I've already hinted at this. We want to develop intuition about biological systems, and we're going to do that through thinking about them quantitatively. My approach will largely be sort of case study based, and the way that those case studies come to me is through what you'll see in the next vignette, which is called I Wonder. And that really comes down to a sense that there are some examples of problems that people have tackled where I personally either find the nature of the experiment, the nature of the phenomenon itself, the theoretical approach, the dialogue between theory and experiment, the sharp predictions, all those kinds of things are items that end up inspiring me with respect to particular case studies. And what I want to do is highlight reliable data, quantitative estimates, and then really trying to make models that make predictions. In the first part of the course, we're going to adopt what I call the stick in the sand sort of estimates. And I'm inspired here. If we were in the classroom, I would have my Wilson volleyball with me, because I always thought that the movie Castaway had an element of important truth to it about the role of isolation. There's a famous mathematician named Jean-Victor Poncelet, who was a soldier in Napoleon's army and was left in the snow for dead near Moscow. And during his time in prison, in a Russian prison, he tried to recreate what he had learned from Monge at the École Polytechnique in France about geometry. And in so doing, he discovered much of what we now call projective geometry. I was very intrigued when Thomas Paine went to France with the expression, "kill the monarchy, not the man." He was unhappy that there was a move afoot to behead the king, and in the end, Thomas Paine himself found himself in prison as a possible candidate, like Lavoisier, for having his head taken off. And while he was in prison, he wrote The Age of Reason. Of course, there's also fictional stories about people like Robinson Crusoe. So in the case of the Castaway, which starred Tom Hanks, he worked for FedEx. The plane went down. He was a sole survivor. He was on an island, and all sorts of debris from the crash went onto the beach, including a box that had one of these Wilson volleyballs, and on it he drew this little figure that you see, Wilson. And the way I like to think of it is that when we're engaged in this kind of order of magnitude thinking, and also just the test of life, that we have to be the court. We have to be the judge in our court of appeal. And I like you to think of me as not, the professor who's going to give you tests. Life is your test, and your own science is your test, and you need to be your own biggest critic. But I always think of my friend Wilson when I'm doing these things. Like if I'm just sitting there, I don't have my iPhone, I don't have a computer, I don't have anything. I can't consult anybody. What am I going to be able to figure out from first principles? So that's kind of going to be the perspective. I will refer to this slide again in some upcoming vignettes, but for my purposes here, I just want to say that there's this juxtaposition of data and factual knowledge on the one hand, and conceptual knowledge on the other. And I'm really super motivated by the latter, conceptual knowledge. I once, a few years back, it's no longer very funny because of the pandemic, but I once said, I thought that science might be better off if we had a few years with no experiments at all. And that was simply to say that I think that there's great value in trying to develop our conceptual muscles. And I think that, the thirst for data, just to give you an example, we have 1 followed by 17 zeros worth of nucleotides deposited on genomic databases. That's a lot of sequence information. I would urge you to figure out how many copies of the complete works of Shakespeare that is. But it's billions of copies. So we have this thirst for data, and that's fine. People talk about data being paramount, but I don't agree with that. Of course we need data, but I think that the conceptual knowledge is really the part that I find most appealing about science as an entity for knowledge generation. It's not facts. There are lots of facts, and many facts are observable. We can watch the moon, the moon changing what time it rises every day. We can notice its phases. I, from this window, can see the sun marching north and south over the seasons. That's all great. Those are facts. But really, those facts only come into their own when we have a conceptual system that explains them. So the Fermi problem notion is a part of that development of conceptual knowledge, and the idea that was that Fermi, would pose these questions where he'd try to figure out in an order of magnitude sense what was the scale of a given thing? And he did this in many different ways in terms of how much heat loss in his winter home, for example, in New York City or Chicago, would there be if he failed to put on the storm windows. He had a famous problem, which probably many of you have heard about the number of piano tuners in Chicago or in New York. He worked out the energetics of ants and the thinking within a colony, and estimates about the yield of the first atomic explosion, not the ones in Japan, but at Alamogordo and so on. So I'm very persuaded by that, and I hope that you will be too. And I also will show this several times throughout the term, but I'm going to be very hung up on this idea of what sets the scale of things. And when I say that, what I mean is I want to, if I have a particular quantity that I observe out in the world, then I would like to be able to understand what sets the scale of that quantity. If I'm swimming, what sets the scale over which my swimming will, or if I'm riding a bike, will be interesting to another swimmer or biker because of a change in the drag that they will experience. I mentioned this idea about the height of a mountain, and that estimate is an easy one to make. The idea is that you choose the height of a mountain, the maximal height, to be that height of a column of rock, whose weight will crush the rock at its base, and the rock at the base suffers a pressure, which is the weight of the column, which is mg, which you can get by doing rho times the cross-sectional area times the height, and then you divide that by the area. That gives you the pressure. But if you want the force, then let's stick with the pressure. So there's a stress, force per unit area at the bottom. But there's also a quantity known as sigma y. You see it on the right-hand side. That's the yield stress. That's the stress at which you will crush an object. And for example, if we were in the classroom, I would stand on a piece of chalk right now and I would crush it. And at any rate, that's something that can be measured. And so on the basis of those few observations, you can figure out that the height of the mountains should be on the order of the yield stress divided by rho g. And that's interesting because it makes a concrete prediction about the height of mountains on Mars, which I offer you as a test case for you to think about. So at any rate, the whole point of this short vignette was to welcome you to BE/APH 161, Physical Biology of the Cell 2022 edition, to try to inspire you with a point of view which will be adopted in this course, which is to try to get a feeling for the organism, for the living world, on the basis of what I will refer to as biological numeracy, and to just give you a little bit of a flavor of the way that we will approach these problems. So with that, I stop and we'll move on to the next vignettes.